Hey everybody, what is up? Gary Simon here. So today is the Adobe XD 2022 crash course, and I do this every year, and that's because they've really updated it a lot typically. And what's interesting is just a few weeks ago, I released my Figma 2022 crash course. So I thought it would be cool to take this design right here and recreate it, which is what we did. We designed this first in Figma, recreate it in Adobe XD. And the reason for that is so that you can see the differences between the two applications, trying to achieve the same exact layout. So we're gonna have some interactivity here. We can see we have little micro interactions occurring here. We can click this and we can have a Lottie Animation, it's called, play, and having a nice smooth page transition automatically based on time triggers. So essentially you're going to learn a lot about Adobe XD in this crash course format, and also be able to compare it against Figma and choose which one you like better. They each have negatives and positives in my opinion, and both are great. All right, so as always, make sure to subscribe and let's get started. Now, before we begin, if you're really interested in learning how to design great looking websites and apps and also earning more as a UI UX designer, you definitely need to check out DesignCourse.com, where I just released it here at the beginning of 2022, and you're gonna learn UI UX in an interactive setting with over 16 hours of video, also interactive UI tests, which you can click play now to check those out, and also mentorship from me, where I take a look at the projects you design and I actually revise them and provide you with valuable feedback. So you're gonna learn about all these topics here. You'll get a certificate at the end if you finish it. And there's just so much to this. I hope you check out DesignCourse.com here in the link at the top of the description, and also any discounts that might be available. So as always, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so as we can see here, this is the very opening screen when you open up Adobe XD. And it's really just about two sections. You can either choose your recent projects down here, or you could create new projects up here based on predefined what are called artboards. They call them artboards and Figma calls them frames. Either way, it's all the same concept. You could choose between predefined device sizes like a desktop or phones. It's also not just about websites and app design. You could also do graphic design as well in here, like creating Instagram stories and stuff like that. And of course, a custom artboard size of width by height in which you specify those numeric values. So we're just gonna do desktop for this. So we're gonna use Web 1920, and we are gonna double click, get this maximized. There we go. And just a couple things right away in terms of moving around for some keyboard shortcuts in this application. Let's go back here, close that, get out of there. There we go. So to pan around like this, you're gonna hold your space bar and then left click, that's all. Just left click and drag. To zoom up, we're going to hit Control and your mouse scroll wheel. And then also to move up and down, just your mouse scroll wheel. And that's all you really need. You're gonna develop muscle memory if you're new to this to be able to quickly, transition between zooming, panning, and scrolling up and down. All right, so now we're gonna talk about just some the basic structure of the Adobe XD navigation. So first over here in this column, this little toolbar, we just have your various tools, of which most of them allow you to draw things. So we have the select tool, which the keyboard shortcut is V, so we're always switching to that, and it allows you just to select items. So obviously the only item we have here is this, which is the artboard itself. When you do select an item, over here in the right column is the property inspector. All very similar to Figma if you've ever used Figma and most other design applications. It's just it's a familiar pattern, so these companies stick with that pattern, not to change things up too much. So the stuff that shows up here is dependent upon what exactly you selected over here. So this is an artboard we selected, so it allows us to transform the width by height. We can make the layout responsive for this. Of course, this is something that would be specific to the artboard. And we have scrolling options. We could change the background color right here. This is all stuff that we will do. And you could also apply a grid to it like this. So additionally, down underneath our move tool, we also have the rectangles for creating rectangles, as you can see. So putting a rectangle like I just did right here on the property inspector, it changes. You know, we now have this component option. We have some of the stuff is same, like a transform. You'll have that for pretty much everything. This transform section. We also have the layout resize section. We have you know, other things like appearance, like adjusting the opacity, blend modes, rounded corners, things like that. And of course, we have effects down here. Also, so yeah, we have rectangles, we have circles, we have polygons. The polygon tool, very similar like it is in Figma. We could choose how many sides show up. So it's actually, you know, not just a triangle as the icon indicates. We also have the line tool for just creating lines. Very simple. Next up, we also have the pen tool, the dreaded pen tool. It's been around since Photoshop, but it basically allows you to create nice straight lines, but also Bezier curves as you left click and drag and hold like that. All right, I'm gonna delete that. And then also we have our type tool for type, obviously. And of course, when you create type, you have a type section down here with the many various typographic settings that you can all control here within the XD. We have the artboard tool. So again, we can create additional artboards or layouts based on these predefined templates, or we can just left click and drag and create our own. Very simple. And then we have a zoom tool, you know, but we could just hit Control mouse and do that quickly without switching to it explicitly. And that are all the tools that we have. And then down here we have three icons. Am I behind? No, you can see them just to the side of me. There we go. So this first one is going to be your design system section, where they call it assets. Basically, if you have a design, you have a color scheme, and when you create and add those colors to this assets section, you can bind those colors to various like backgrounds and strokes of your layout. And when you do that, if you ever decide to, hey, or maybe a stakeholder or employer or your client says, I want to try a different color, you could simply come over here, change the color, and it changes everywhere else in your design rather than you having to do it manually. So if you're working on a real project with multiple pages, it might be large, always a good idea to use this section over here, because you could do the same thing with character styles, because they might want to change fonts and you might have 20 pages of design. You want to change them everywhere. It's easy just to do it in this one location. So same thing with components and even videos down here. So this is one thing that they do have an advantage over Figma. You can actually have videos in your designs, which is a relatively new feature for XD. We also have over here our layers. And you'll see how the layers work. They just stack on top of each other. We can move them around. We can rename them as well. And then we have down here the plugin section. All right, so here's all the plugins that I currently have installed. But when you click plus, it'll bring up this marketplace section where you could search plugins over here by name and install them, update them, et cetera, et cetera. Looks like I need to update some of mine. But yeah, the plugins basically extend functionality outside of the default feature set of Figma. All right, so after that, we have this section right here. We have the design, which is by default where we're at. You're gonna spend most of your time in the design tab. You're gonna spend a good amount of time in prototype tab if you wanna make your designs interactive. Like so, when we click play up here, and this little window shows up, if we want to have a button that changes based on hover, then we can do that here in the prototype section. Also, when you want to switch between artboards, like to simulate multiple pages of your design on your website or your app, you do that in a prototype section as well. And it has a lot of interesting, good features over here as well, which we'll get to. And then finally, a share section. If you're designing this to get feedback, perhaps, maybe it's your own personal project, you can create this share link and people can look at your prototype as if they were clicking play here. And you can also, there's various settings like, for development, like if you're dealing with a front-end developer who deals with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can do all that here. So yeah, very powerful share section. And that's basically it for the UI. I don't want to spend too much time just talking and not doing design. It's very similar setup to Figma. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to create a fictional project for a fictional company, a real project for a fictional company rather, and we're going to call it Oceanica. And it's going to be basically like a vacation company that deals in like tropical vacations, essentially. And so the first thing I wanted to do with this is I want to have, let's go back to our layers. I want to have a whole background where it's a picture of a ocean, essentially. Now, instead of creating this rectangle like I just did and making it the whole size, we could make this photograph that we're going to use, make it a part of the background just for the whole artboard itself. But putting it in a rectangle actually allows us more flexibility because we can change the size of it and crop it and do all those other things. So the one I want to use is the picture I want to use is from Unsplash. Now I'm not sure if this has an Unsplash random image. So if I go over here to plugins, Unsplash. All right, so actually I never installed the Unsplash plugin. So let's do that. I'm gonna do this on the fly. I wasn't planning on doing this. All right, so now if we look, let's see here. Now I'm not sure, I may have to restart my app. And no, actually it was right down here at the very bottom. So we wanna select, let's go to our layers to make sure we have our rectangle 1 is selected currently. So when it's highlighted as blue like this, you know the layer or the current object is selected. So if we go back here to our plugins, we click Unsplash, we'll do a search for dark water. And the one I want is right here. So if we click that, actually I haven't used this before. There we go. It takes a little time for it to show up. All right, so what it's done is inside of this rectangle, it's placed this ocean graphic, and we can move this around. We can also change the width and the height by left clicking and dragging in off the side. Now additionally, what we can do is we can double click this, and when we do that, we get access to the photograph itself, and we can hold Shift and Alt and scale this thing up and move it around. I'm gonna move it like right there. The reason I'm doing it is because we can see this like whitewash section right here. So it's white. I want to have white text. So the white text is going to be up over here in this dark area. And that way we don't have contrast issues. So I might just push it down a little bit more and then we'll just click off and there you go. So that's how you can get images inside. So you can have any type of like we can have an ellipse or a polygon selected and we can just get images right there and place them in that way. All right, so the next section we're going to focus on here is the navigation or the nav bar. Now, typically on a desktop, the pattern that we're used to is having a logo on the left and then like a navigation to the right of it somewhere. So let's focus on the logo. We're going to create a very quick logo just to show that you can actually do illustration, graphic design, identity design here in Adobe XD. So we're going to start off with some type. I'm just going to randomly kind of place it up here and we'll move it afterwards. So Oceanica, O-C-I-A-N-I-C-A. And we're going to change the settings over here. We can see we have there way at the bottom the color, so we can make it, we can drag it up to white in this little color palette selector. You have different options here. We have hex, RGB, or HSB, from which we could choose between. Figma has a little bit more options like HSL as well, but I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of that. This is just fine, and I want to change the font. So I have a font called Aileron. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. It's a font you can download if you just go to Google and you type in A-I-L-E-R-O-N, and you can install that. Oops. What is happening? A-I-L. There we go. It's not letting me choose it. There we go. As you can see, it's right here, Aileron, and it's real nice sans serif font that I like a lot. Now you could use any other font that you want. It's not a big deal. We're gonna make this bold as well. And we can see currently the size is 20. We might wanna bump this up. Let's see here. A little bit more. So I might actually go to 30, like right around there. That's pretty good to me. Okay, and additionally, you notice how by accident I selected this. We don't want to select it anymore. So we're going to add this little padlock. We're going to lock the layer. So now we cannot touch it anymore. And of course, if we want to turn that off, we just go back here and click it. Or if we click it over here, you'll see this little lock icon. If you click it, now we can gain access to make modifications again. All right, so we're also going to have like a little symbolism next to it. And I'll show you real quickly. This is a very limited use case of the pen tool and also some of the operators up here. So we're going to have an ellipse next to it. Hold Shift and Alt to scale it from the center and also keep it a perfect circle. And we're going to get rid of the border. One thing I don't like about Adobe XD is that whenever you create a new shape, it adds this gray border like every single time. I hate that. If there's a way to turn that off, let me know. Anyhow, now that we have that, we're going to take our pen tool and I'm going to start right around here. You can see there's guides that show up, by the way. You'll see various guides, it's helpful. We're going to left click right here just outside of it. And then we're going to come out here to around the middle. And I'm going to left click and hold Shift. All right, so something right around here. It's like a 45-degree angle. That's what Shift does. It lets you get to certain angles easily. Otherwise, if you let go, it lets you go wherever you want. So right around here, we're going to let go. And then we're going to bring it back up to the same horizontal path or the row in which the first vertex was placed. We're going to left click there just once. And then we're going to come up around and bring it back to the very first one to create a closed shape. Then we're going to hold Shift and left click and select both of these elements. Once we do that, we can now come up here to this operator and we can subtract this top value or this top shape that we just created from the bottom. So we click that and there you go. So now it's that whole section is now just non-existent. And if you look in here, as you can see, it says subtraction. It's actually a group. If you double click it, you gain access back to this so you can actually make adjustments to that negative space area where it's all empty. All right, and that's going to be our logo. So let's position this over a little bit. We get this moved up. And there we go. All right, so now we're going to talk about, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of components if you haven't really worked in any of these apps. Same thing, it's the same concept as in Figma and other design apps, but a component is simply a reusable element that you create, and it has a number of advantages. And I'm going to demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about right here. So I'm going to duplicate this, hit Control D, and that duplicates the artboard. So now we have two of them, right? Now a logo is something that shows up on every screen of your UI, correct? Pretty much. And if you want to make a change to this logo, right, or this repeating element, let's change. Just say for instance, we want to change this color from white to something else. All right, so we're going to change it here. You don't have to follow this, by the way. All right, so now I've made it blue. All right, it has not updated over here. So this would be a pain if you had 20 different pages and you have to update all of them manually, right? So what we do instead is, I'm going to back up. We'll take both of these elements, holding Shift, or you can hold Control, and I can see they're both selected here in there, in the subtraction area. And now we create a component. So we can click plus right here under Component on the Property Inspector, or Control K. And now it's going to turn it to green. The outline is green. And in Figma, it turns it to purple, I believe. So just slight differences. And now if I duplicate the same artboard, after having made that change, we could double click into it and I could change the color right here. And guess what? It updates here as well. All right, so a couple other things about components that are important to understand. If I select this one, you can see this little triangle here, or it's not a triangle, it's like it's a square that's been rotated a little bit. It's filled in green. That means this is the main component or the master component. This one is not filled in green. It's filled in white in the middle. Kind of might be hard to see. And that means it's an instance of that component. So if you make a change to this component and change this color, it only updates for itself and not the main component. So that's important to understand when it comes to instance components. You can actually customize an instance of this component over here without affecting other instances. All right. You can also do things like change the text. Whatever, it's not going to be affected on the main component or the other instance components. So we'll get more experience with that. Just make sure that this is a component. And you could double click on here in the layers section on the component name itself to rename your layer. So we could call this logo now, and it makes much more sense just for the purposes of organization. So if we come back over here, we can see under components, it says component 1, call that logo, and there we go. We have a nice area where we have our first component in our design system. Okay, so I know I'm really focusing on the tiny details here, but once I focus, once I've talked about components, we're not really going to talk about it again until we get to the default states and the state, the state components, and we'll get into that in a little bit. In fact, we're going to get into that right now because we're going to create a little navigation. So with the type tool, left click right around there, home. All right, so notice when I move up and down in my keyboard arrow keys, at certain points, it'll give us these guides, these visual references, letting us know that, hey, we're in line with other things that are adjacent to it. So for this, typically speaking, when it comes to navigations versus the logo demands a little bit more attention from a visual hierarchy perspective, meaning it'll grab attention a little bit more. So what we'll do, instead of making it the same color, not the same color, but the same size, we could take it down from 30 to around 24, right around there. And that looks pretty good. I don't want this to be that color. We're gonna make that white. All right. So a nav item is a repeating element, right? Correct. So what we want to do is create a component out of that. So we're going to hit component right there, plus or Control K, and now we've created a component out of it. Now, when it comes to navigation design, you want to have different states of your nav items, your navigation items. This is a nav item. You might have contact us as another, etc. In these states, what I mean by that is you usually have a hover state. When your mouse hovers on top of it, something should change. And then you also have an active state, like what is the currently active page. So by default, we're going to make this home page. This home button is going to be bold. You could also indicate that active page status, not just by font weights like being bold, but also through color. You can add an underline. You could add a little icon. So those are the primary ways in which you can indicate a focus state or the current page state. So right here, we can see component, we have a default state. We can click plus, and we have this little menu that shows up, new state, hover state, or toggle state. So this isn't going to be a hover state right here. We're just going to choose new state. And we're going to change this to, from default, we're going to say active. Now, our default state is actually not going to be bold and active. It's going to be a font weight of regular. So if we double click into this, we'll get access to the text, and we're going to change this here to regular. All right, now if we come back, click active, this is the one, double click into it, we're going to make bold. All right, so it might be a little bit confusing, but you're going to see how this works all in a second. So if I click on back to our default state, it's regular, font weight, and then click on active, and it's bold. All right, so now what we can do is we can duplicate this. Actually, before we duplicate it, let's create another state, and that will be a hover state. So right here, hover. And so for our hover state, we're going to change the color of the type. So we're going to come over here. We're going to, let me get this color actually. The color code for that, which you could type in on your keyboard, is 00 FEFE. That's the hex code. And that gives you the same exact color that I'm working with here. All right, so we could click plus over here to save this as a color swatch. And now, if I click out and back in, we have our default, we have our active, and we have our hover. All right, so default state. Now, let's take a look at our prototype section here. We have a hover state. And if I click play on this, notice how it actually hovers correctly. Very, very, very cool. All right, so what we're going to do now is go back to the design tab. We're going to duplicate this, Control D, move it over. By the way, to duplicate, you can also hold Alt and just move over, Alt and Shift here in this case, and just move this over. Now that we have two elements here, we can take both of these and we can create another component. So you can nest components inside of each other. And this is real important for things like navigations. Once we have two of these components, we'll take both of them and create another component. All right, so now we have access to this property down here where it says stack and padding. So we're going to choose stack. And by default, it knows we're creating a horizontal or a column based layout. And that's what we want for this navigation. You could see some values right here, like this 57. That's the amount of white space numerically between these two elements. So we could change this value by changing our keyboard, by hitting the up and down arrow or just typing in. But this allows us to control the white space or the empty space between the elements. So now what we could do is we could double click in here and we'll make this one contact. Now watch this. If we double click and just select this one again, we hit Control D, it's going to maintain that spacing. This one's going to be tours. Now we double click over here and we simply just choose active. And look at us. We've created our very first simple navigation. All right. So another thing about these stacked components is we could double click and we can move things around, which is very cool. So we want to go over here, move it over there. So you can just switch your nav items around very easily, and it maintains the spacing and all that stuff. Okay, so next up, we're going to have a final call to action over here. And before we do that, it's important to make sure your alignment is consistent and where it needs to be. So that's what the grid is for. So if we get this grid over here, we can start making adjustments to this. So notice it's a 12 column grid by 12 column grid by default. And what this is it's a way for you to structure your layout and your different columns and rows of your layout in such a way that is repeatable. And a front-end developer, those who deal with the code and who are responsible for making this design a reality in the browser and on devices, they oftentimes will use a 12-column grid system in their CSS. And this allows you to structure your things so that your design works well for your developer in a sense. But for us, for this purpose, I just want to make sure we have an equal amount of white space established on the very left of the design, which is kind of established where the logo begins, and also the very right. So I want to increase this little white space here and here just a bit. So we do that at this value down here. So if I change this to, let's say 200, there you go. We have a little bit more white space. So now we could take this element, put it right up against the edge, and then for a button, we're going to make it right up against this edge as well. That will give us a nice consistent amount of white space on the very left of the design and the very right of the design as well. And of course, we can always turn this off. What we'll do is for now just hide that. And we're going to create another element, a type element. This is going to be what's called a call to action. It's basically a call to action is something that you want somebody to be able to see easily and also to take action upon. So a button is a call to action. A form element like filling out an email is also an action. A scroll indicator is also an action. Start a journey. So this is something you would want people to click so that you can get them to take a tour with your company or whatever, or book a vacation. So we're going to make this one bold. And we're also going to give this one a little arrow icon. All right, so before we do that, we'll come back here to our artboard and we will get our layout. There we go. We want to make sure there, everything's in line, is exactly where it needs to be. That's the importance of the grid and your alignment indicators. So over here, we're going to create our own little arrow, or kind of like a line-based arrow. So I'm going to take the line tool, hold Shift, which again, it gives you these nice angles. Right around there is good, and we'll increase the size maybe to 2, and we're going to use a swatch. There we go. And then we are going to use the pen tool. I'm just going to left click a little bit behind it, hold Shift right there near the center, and then hold Shift again. Now I know that looks bad. Increase that to 2 for the stroke width, and then also this color. Finally, we take our move tool, select it, left, there we go. Very simple arrow that we've created. All right, so now we'll group that up, Control G. So that's another thing that I'll introduce you to. You take multiple items and create a group out of them, and that's just for organization. And you can also just grab one element and not have to, select both and grab them. This is now a group. You double click it, you have access inside of it, and you can also right click and ungroup as well, or Control Shift G. So now this is one coherent, button. So we're going to make a component out of it, because this would show up, as well in your design in multiple pages. So we're going to click plus over here. And I do want to have a slight thing change when the mouse hovers over it. I want to take this arrow and kind of just shift it over to the right a little bit. How will we do that? Well, it comes back to our component states. So we're going to click new hover state, and we'll hit enter. And so now for the hover state, we're simply going to double click, take that arrow, move it over to the right. Not too close to the S, but enough of a difference to where we would notice it. So now if we look between these two, it's doing that. Let's hit play and look at that. It's very subtle, but it's noticeable. One thing I forgot to tell you about, and this is kind of a pain, is when you change the the button text, you need to do that for the states as well. There is a case though where maybe there's a better way to do that, so where you don't have to do that. But for instance, if we take contact and we look at our hover state, it changes that. So contact us, I think that was contact us, right? Let's see here. Nope. Let's double click that. There we go. And then tours, we'll double click into there in a hover state. Tours. All right. So now let's switch that back to default and back to default. So now if we click play again, there we go. Okay. That is our navigation essentially. And what we want to do now is this whole navigation itself is also a component. So we can take this, all these elements, by left clicking and dragging and selecting them, and then creating a component out of that. All right, so now this whole component is this whole navigation is one component essentially. All right, so let's continue on. Now we're gonna deal with the hero section, which is the section on a website usually where it shows up. It's the first element. It's the big thing that really grabs your attention. It's the beginning of your design underneath your navigation. And it's usually comprised of a headline, perhaps a sub-headline, and a big strong call to action of some sort. So for us, we're gonna have some type. It's gonna start right there. Discover the water. Now for your headline, you always want that to be the thing that they read first. And so as such, we reinforce that concept through visual hierarchy. And in terms of type, then we want to make that type large and usually bold, although it doesn't have to be bold. So we're going to come over here, hit the keyboard up arrow key, and get us to a nice size, nice big old size. I don't want it to be that color. We'll make it white, although it could be that color. There's a lot of subjective decisions that you can make. And we're just going to hold shift and move it down here. Right around there, I think looks pretty solid. Next up, we're going to have a subheadline, which is a smaller text underneath it, usually about a sentence or two. So we're going to duplicate that or hold Shift Alt left click drag down. And then what we'll do is change the size. So typographic visual hierarchy. If we left this to be the same size as the type above it, you're not really sure where to look first because it's styled exactly the same. So we're going to come down and just really change. We're going to make sure we're selecting it and not in edit mode. We're going to change the size. And we can also change the weight to really reinforce that visual hierarchy. So regular. We could even go light if we really want to impact that concept. And for this, we're going to say from pristine waters, or is it PRI? I think it is. From pristine waters to majestic forests, double hyphen, we've got it all. Now, I don't like how this is kind of getting close to this white. It's kind of hard to read this end portion right here. So what we can do is we can take the type and we can click on this fixed size. Now that gives us these little circles in which we can now scale the type and also increase that. And now we can create multi-line type easily. So I'm pretty happy with that. Maybe a little bit large, so I might scale that down just a bit. And you could also do other things like letter spacing right here. You can increase the leading right here. So what that is, like the space between your individual lines of type. It's all pretty good in my opinion, so I'm going to leave it right there. Next up, remember I mentioned a hero section usually consists of a headline, subheadline, and a call to action. Typically, a call to action will be a button, the page that you want people to see the most or visit. So for us, we're going to make a button that says start my journey today. Pretty much it would take them to the same place as this button up here. And so there's a lot of different ways to approach this. I'm going to take a more graphic designs oriented approach. So we're going to create kind of like an arrow pointing to a button. So we're going to take a line tool, left click, maybe right there. I'm going to push this like pretty down quite far. There we go. And make that white. Now, I realized the line tool probably wasn't a good idea for what I want to do because I want to have another, I wanted to take a 90-degree angle turn over here and kind of point to a button. So anything that's more than those two more than just a line, you would use the pen tool. So now I'm going to delete that. So we're going to take this and notice how I'm aligning it correctly here based on the column where the design starts. I'm going to left click probably right around here. And don't worry, we can edit this afterwards to right here. I'm holding shift and then I'm going to kind of push it probably right around here. And then hit escape to get out of edit mode. Hit escape twice. We're going to make this white for the border. And this is roughly what your design should look like at this point. And then now we're going to come in. I'm really zooming up here. Remember, that's Control scroll wheel. And we're going to create, we could use the polygon tool, but I'm just going to use the pen tool. A little arrow at the end of it. Actually, that was the wrong way to approach that. Let me go back, hit P. We're going to start here, here, and then there we go. We have that guide to help us. And now I'm going to get rid of the stroke and add a fill. There you go. So I was able to do it pretty well. You need some practice. I could probably stand to make this larger. So we select it, hold Shift Alt, and just bump that up in size. Now this would be a good point in time to select both of those elements. All right, as you can see, path 3 and 4. We can just group that up. So now we can move this around if we wish. Now, if you made yours too long or too short, after making it a group, you could double click into it. We could double click again into this line. We get to edit mode where we can edit the little points that we make. So we can hold shift and move that around if we wish. All right, so I'm pretty happy with what mine is so far. And now we're gonna add the button type. So we're gonna take our type tool and we're gonna say, start my journey today. We're gonna make it bold. And we're gonna scale down the size probably to like 30 looks pretty good to me. Oops, delete that. So I'm gonna push this around. I know this is kind of hard to see, but don't worry, we're gonna make some changes to this. All right, so start my journey today. That's looking pretty good. And I kind of want to wrap this in a container. We're gonna create a layer blur to increase the contrast behind this type, because we have this whitewash in this water. It's kind of creating contrast issues. So I'm gonna show you a cool way to fix that. So we're gonna come probably right around here where we have this guide's showing up on my design. It might not yours, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to probably like a little bit in, left click and drag, and I'm going to probably start this right around there, or end it rather. And we're going to move this just on top of our locked layer, so it's at the bottom. And now we're going to make this black. We're going to get rid of the stroke, and then we're going to choose background blur. And the amount, like the amount of blur we can control right here. We can also control the brightness. So we can make this darker. I kind of like that. And the opacity as well, you can make it even darker still. So I think I like these values, 13, 8, and 20%. And my goal for this is I probably want to get this up higher so that this text is kind of in the vertical center. And I think that's pretty good right there. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Now, I do know, yeah, actually, I might want to move this over. There we go. It's when you move things over, like inside of a container like this, you can get guides letting you know that this right here is in the center of this particular element right here. So I think I like that a little bit better. And now, I do know we're going to have a section of design underneath this. So we can take the artboard and just extend the height. Maybe just somewhere right around here. Now it's white because this artboard background is white, and this photograph obviously doesn't extend beyond it. So we're going to choose a color by selecting our artboard, choosing appearance and fill, and we have this little eyedropper tool. You can hit I to access that on your keyboard, but it allows you to choose colors that exist in your design. So I like that, but I want to desaturate. I want to take out some of the color and add more gray. So we can probably push it to right around here. 2E363A is the color code. And that looks pretty good to me. Now we can kind of see, I might want to make some more adjustments here. Just push this over slightly. And this right here, I'm going to take this arrow, just move it to the right a bit. And then this line, I will move that as well. There we go. Now we're going to take this, we're going to duplicate it, Control D, just slide it over here and slide it down. Now I don't want to layer our background blur for this, so we're going to delete that. And for the color, we're going to take the eyedrop tool, grab this background color, and make it just slightly lighter. Right around there. So we're creating kind of an interesting layout. This is obviously a little bit more of an advanced level layout, but that's just to make it a little bit more interesting. So now over here, we're gonna have a 2-column approach to our hero section, which means all of this is 1 column. It's kind of like 50-50 almost, split based on the width. And then we're gonna have another column over here where we have 3 different, I wanna call them features, but they're basically features about this company. So I'm going to take this right here. We're going to duplicate that again, push it over here, holding Shift, and then extend it all the way out, and then up. And it's going to end right where the top of this type is over here. Now for this one, we want to make it a little bit different of a design. I want to make it darker. So how can we do that? Well, our brightness we can take down. Our opacity we can increase. So -3, 46, that looks pretty good to me. All right, so now inside of it, we're gonna have 3 rows, kind of like call to actions. They're gonna be interactive. And so we're gonna take this right here and our type, we're gonna say hang gliding. All right, that looks pretty good there for size. We're gonna leave the same size as this type, which is 30. And then we're gonna have a little description underneath it. So we're gonna duplicate that, hold Shift, left click, drag down. And then under this one, we're going to say, do you love hanging around and flying in the air? We've got you covered. Okay, so now visual hierarchy, right? Typographic visual hierarchy. We want to establish that. We can come down to like 24 or even maybe just 20. Actually, I think we'll do like 22. And then we'll change this to regular. And we will also make this a fixed size. We could pull this down. We have too much leading, so we can decrease that. That looks good right there, around 32. And that looks pretty solid right there. Now we can also increase that visual hierarchy a little bit more by changing the color of this piece of type. Maybe a little bit less contrast. So what that means is we can take something that's an adjacent color, and now obviously you can't hardly see that. That would be terrible. We're going to come up here just to get some of this hue in the color scheme that's already found into this type. So B5C 6D1 would be a good value for that. All right. So that's looking pretty solid right there. And I want to have kind of like a little indicator when you're hovering over there's going to be two more of these beneath it. So to do that, I'm going to, interesting way you can do that is by taking the rectangle tool and maybe to the left somewhere where this container begins. There we go. Get rid of that stupid border. And I kind of like that. Okay, so now we're going to take these three elements. We're going to create a component out of it, and we're going to add a hover state. Hit enter. And our hover state will have this by default. Our default state will not. We're going to make two adjustments. We're going to take the opacity down, and then also with the left keyboard arrow key, move it off to the right, maybe like 5-6 times. All right, so now when we select this is our default state, this is our hover state. And sometimes I hate, why does it do that? It doesn't remember the state. That's one thing I don't like about Adobe XD. So all we can do is we just have to go back here to hover state, make sure it's selected, double click, bring back the 100%, and put it back into its proper place, which is right there. So hopefully now when we select between them, there we go. So now if we hit play, look at that. Isn't that cool? Yes, it is. Okay, so now what we can do is we could duplicate this. There we go. You want that guide to show up to let you know exactly where we need to be. We'll duplicate it one more. Oh, I forgot. We could take both of these and make a component. That way when we, we'll stack them vertical. It knows vertical. So now we double click this, duplicate, Control D. And now you could change each one of these titles to something else in this type as well. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hit play. And now we can see they all work. There's a little bit of delay on here. So you can go back to the prototype tab right here. And when we double click into one of these, we could change the type of action from auto animate, which will simply create a nice animation between the two states based on where things and how things have changed, to a transition, and just choose none. So now if I hit play, notice how it's instant. Now these ones, you'd have to do that for all the other ones, unfortunately, but yeah, there we go. Now I'm gonna just keep it at auto animate though. So now when we go back, it is consistent. Okay, so we're gonna go back to design, and let's get this designed well, or let's get this whole section, get it kind of centered here. There we go. All right. So now we're going to finish off this design down here just by adding, and I'm going to show you one real cool tool called the repeat grid. We're going to have just a 3-column layout. and drag out somewhere right around there. We can always change the position later. With this selected, we're going to go to our plugins and we're going to choose Unsplash, and I'm going to search it for beach. All right, so we'll choose this one. So just left click it once and now it has updated that. All right. And then we'll take our type tool. We're gonna say Punta Monita. That's a fake beach name that I just made up. All right, so white. We will bump this up in size, maybe to make this bold as well. Oops. Just kind of looking at the size. Let's just make this 30 actually. There we go. We'll duplicate that. Now what was this size? We'll just keep things consistent. It was 22 regular. So again, you would want to add these if this were a real design to your design assets so that you can just click them and apply them easily. So let's do 22 in regular. All right, so for this, you know what? You could use lorem ipsum text, which is just kind of like fake Latin text. For me, I'm just gonna copy this, change that, drag this in right around there, and then also change this color as well based on the background in which it's sitting. Right around there, I think is good. So this is gonna be a card design. A card is just kind of like, you know, a little card, essentially, and we're gonna have 3 of them. So we could do the component, which would make sense. So we created a component out of it. I don't want any interactivity, so I don't have to add states or anything like that. And now what I can do is, I could do a couple things. I could do this in a repeat grid format. So I just pull this out after clicking grid, and look at that. Very cool stuff. We can control the spacing. But I could also do it the way where we select, we create 2 of them and create a component out of those and then control the spacing that way as well. Either way will work just fine. So after you have this, we could right click and click ungroup, and now we have just 3 evenly spaced elements here. And if we want to change and customize these pictures, I wish it remembered my last search. I should be able to hit enter on my keyboard, but yeah, so there's some usability issues here. You know, let's get some different looking images. Like here's one. Can't see it. I would love to be able to move this around, but you can't. And we'll go back one more time. Beach. And whatever, I'll just choose that. We'll see it change here in a second. Or at least I thought I would see it change. What is happening? Maybe it's being slow. There we go. That one worked. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's click on our grid one last time. See how it's not exactly here? So we can kind of just move this over. There we go. Now everything's centered up, and we could take this off. All right, so we're certainly not done yet, but let's click play. Notice how we can scroll down. We have our interactivity. Very cool. All right, so now I want to show you some other features, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a little overlay, and we're going to create a really cool animation. We're not going to create it from scratch. We're going to use one called Lottie, L-O-T-T-I-E. It's a plugin. So when you click up here, click plugins, type in Lottie, and you'll find Lottie files and install that. And you have to create an account. It's free. And then once you get it all logged in, you'll be ready to rock. So what we'll do is I'm going to create real quickly a new frame, or artboard rather. And so I'm just going to left click and drag out one like this size or so. Now, having done that, we're going to click on Lottie files. And Lottie files is just a bunch of little cool animations, and you can search for all sorts of types of ones. You can do loading graphics and just interesting stuff like that. So we're going to do one right here, and we're going to click on it, and we want to insert it as Lottie. Now it's just placed it in the center of this artboard that was selected. And what we can do is if we, say for instance, we want to have this little animation play when this button right here is clicked. So we select this, we go to prototype, and then we drag this little line right here to that. Then we type, for the triggers, tap. So tap means like tap with your finger or click with your mouse button. And we're going to change the type here to overlay. That means it's going to overlay this artboard on top of the existing, and we can kind of position the settings. Like if we want it to be like right around there, that would work. If we want it to be right over this button, we can just drag it down over here. And now this overlay is almost there in the center. I can move it up a little bit of the text. Move it up more. There we go. Now it's like in the center. So now if I click play and we click this button, look at that. So it's playing that Lottie animation and it's not looping. So what we can do is we go back to design, choose this, and click the loop button. You also have play on tap, no playback, you edit playback. You have options with these. So now if we go back to this prototype, oops, you want to make sure you select this artboard and hit play. We can click that and look at that. Look how cool that is. It'll just keep looping indefinitely unless we do something else. So let's say after 2 seconds, this will it'll direct us to a new layout, like a different page or something. So let's take this. Let's double click up here and change this to home, by the way. And let's duplicate this. So Control D. And then maybe this is going to be start a journey. Now I'm not going to sit here designing a whole other page, but I will make it different enough to where we can see 2 distinct pages. So I'm just deleting a bunch of stuff over here. Let's unlock that. Let's get rid of this first. So I'll change this type to start your journey today or something like that, blah, blah, blah. And then we'll just assume this would be a secondary page of some sort with content down here, whatever. So now what we can do, which is really cool, the prototyping gives you a lot of abilities, is we can drag, here let's push it, position that away. We can drag this to this artboard right here. Then we can change the trigger to time. So that means this will transition to this page based on this delay value. So we'll say we want that to see that little loading graphic for 1.5 seconds, 1.5 S, and we'll leave it on. We'll just leave it on auto animate, and we'll see what happens here. So now we'll go back here. We'll hit play. We'll click on this, and look at that. So because we left it on auto animated, it created that nice little animation because we changed the height of this background graphic, and it worked just well. So then what we can do is we can come back over here. We could take our logo, point it back to the home page. Let's leave it on auto animate and see how that looks. So once again, just to go from the beginning, we click this, go back here. Very, very cool. So that's essentially what you do in the prototype tab. You know, you would create more of these. This might be your contact page, like contact right here. Maybe contact, this says contact us, and then you start designing your form elements. Maybe we could have like a little container that goes right here, all the way from the left to the right. You could leave it white like this, or we can make it less contrast. Maybe just bump that up slightly. It'd be more of like kind of almost like a dark mode approach. And then you can have your form inside of there. We're not going to design that though, because it's already kind of a long tutorial. And then we would take our contact. It's very hard to see. And we go into prototype. We drag this all the way to our contact. So now click contact. There we go. Go back home. Click Start a Journey. As you can see, now we're creating an interactive experience based on this design that we created. And that's essentially it. Now, of course, there's a lot more tiny little details about the prototyping section and the design section and all that. But that is it in a nutshell. And I think that's pretty solid for a crash course. And now you can check out my other crash course on Figma using this same design here and really determine which one you like best out of all of these. All right, everybody, hopefully you enjoyed that crash course. Of course, there's a lot more to learn. And again, if you are interested in learning more about UI, UX design, definitely check out DesignCourse.com, which is my service for teaching UI, UX design in an interactive setting. Take a look at the top link here in the YouTube description to check that out, along with any discounts that might be available. Now, as always, make sure to subscribe up, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.